Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, all right. So, hey guys, so Felicia wanted me and Andrew and the rest of Beehive to kind of walk through some of the different rendering options that you guys have while you're kind of isolated and quarantined at home. We realize that you guys don't have the same like kind of capabilities that you would on your local computers. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through how to remote desktop into kind of the Stuckeman ones from a Mac computer. Doing it through a Windows is actually much simpler. And then we're going to go through some different V-Ray tactics that can be kind of super helpful for you guys when you're rendering out some of your NCMA projects. So to start, I'm going to share with you guys a couple of different things when we kind of go through everything. So the first thing, this is available on our Beehive website, and then also I'll have Felicia posted on your Canvas page. Basically, this is just a Beehive kind of V-Ray tutorial sheet. So everything that I go through today will be showcased in this kind of sheet, so you can refer to that the entire time. And then also what I'm going to be sharing with you guys, let me share my screen here. I'm also going to be sharing with you guys a remote desktop, how to connecting into the Stuckeman computers. This was shared with us actually about a week ago. I think you guys have access to this as well, but if you don't, we're going to give it to you. And I'm actually going to show you kind of a shortcut that you can use to kind of make this a little bit easier, and a program you can download for free that will make it your lives much simpler. So the first thing you guys need to do, you need to connect to a Penn State VPN. In order to do that, you click this link here. This will bring up a page. It looks like this. So you're going to install it either Mac or Windows. You'll click the kind of links to go through all the steps. It's kind of self-explanatory on how to go through everything. So you can click the link for the instructions, and then you'll go to the downloads folder, sign in for whatever you're trying to do. So yeah, we'll log in here. Then I can show you guys what it actually looks like. So connecting to Penn State, you're just going to choose whether you want the Windows or Mac, or even if you're running a Linux, good luck. But you can use one of those. And then you're basically just going to follow all the steps that you would in this link here. So connecting to the Penn State VPN, you're going to download the little link that comes up when you click, this guy here. So you'll download that file. You'll basically just walk through all the steps, install it, open it all up, and then just make sure it all becomes enabled. When you finally get that thing installed, what you're going to do is you're going to go to your application folder, either in your Mac or your Windows computer. So go to the applications. What's going to come up is this little Cisco Mobility Connect. So this guy's going to come up here. What you're going to want to do is type in this little URL. So it's vpn.its.psu.edu. Then you'll hit connect. So type in your login key. So for me, I'll do that now. So then you'll click accept. And then it should establish a VPN connection. You should be connected, and that'll come up with this little window right here, and then you can access it all from right there. So that'll be kind of what we're going through in order to get there. So then the next thing you need to know is where to actually access the specific IP addresses for the computers at Penn State. So in order to do that, on that same sheet that I'm going to share with you guys, so this one here, if you point your browser to this link right here, so it'll come up with this guy right here. Basically, this is a map or a digital map of all the different computers that are available in Stuckeman. You guys should have access as second years to everything from 5th year to 1st year. The only ones I think you won't have access to are some of the landscape ones, the CoLab computers, and then also the Hamer Center. I think those are really the only ones that you won't be able to connect to. So if we go kind of through these, you can kind of go into the second year folder. When you click on it, you'll see some of the ones that are either turned off, they're available, or they'll show up as in use if they're red. If you're wanting to connect to a Mac one, so let's say the first year ones here. So if you want to connect to a Mac one, you'll click the URL or the IP address URL, and it'll open up if you want to allow for screen sharing. So that'll basically just put you right into the computer. You'll type in all your information, and it'll show up right away. For the Windows ones, if you're on a Mac computer and you want to use a Windows kind of operating system or a Windows computer, it gets a little more complicated, because when you try and do it, it'll just send this link to a download. And then it'll come up as like it's an RPD file, and your computer won't actually know how to read that. So what I did is I found a little shortcut. If you go to the App Store on Mac, you can download Microsoft Remote Desktop 10. And then when you download this, it's free. You just download it. It takes like 2 minutes. When you open this up, what comes up is, oops, sorry, getting ahead of myself here. So when you open this guy up, what comes up here is it'll come up with a kind of PC and then workspaces that you can use from. So you'll want to add a different PC in, and then when you click add, you'll just type in the IP host address for whatever computer that is. So that address basically is just going to be this little number right here. So you'll type that in exactly. So I have our collab one that me and Andrew use for our project. So you just double click on the little link. You'll type in your username and password. So your Penn State one, we'll go through that now. So you'll connect to it, and then this will just gonna say like if it's a secure connection. It is, because it's a Penn State VPN, so you'll be able to connect to it and it shouldn't have any problems at all. So you'll just hit continue, and then what'll happen is it'll open up whatever computer that you're using. If you already have a desktop on that computer, actually, it'll actually show up all the programs and kind of files you have saved that have been kind of going through here. So that's basically the gist of how to remote in. And then the nice thing about this is you can actually swipe back and forth between Mac and Windows. So if you want to be running Photoshop on here, you can be doing that while also rendering out anything that's going on a computer, basically in another state or in another city. So really kind of easy and quick way to go through that. It allows you to run both Mac and Windows at the same time. So the next thing that me and Andrew are going to do, so we're going to go through basically a V-Ray model. And how to kind of set up some different materials, and then also how to do basically simple V-Ray rendering techniques and tactics. Doing test ones, we're going to go through adding some materials, adding some lighting, and adding different suns tactics, and then even cutting sections through models like this. That way that you can actually get some kind of cool section perspectives if you wanted to do it that way. We've actually done this tutorial for a couple of you guys in second year. I know some of the sections last semester we did, but this is just gonna kind of round it all out for you guys. So if you've already done it before, this is just gonna be kind of like rehashing it. If you haven't seen any of this before, this is gonna be kind of really helpful for you guys to go through and see how V-Ray actually works, because it's one of the more complicated programs, but it produces probably the best renderings of any software that's really out there on the market. So the first thing you're going to do is open up your Rhino file or whatever kind of program you're working through. We're going to go through a Rhino tutorial today. The engine is the same for Rhino and SketchUp, and I think also 3ds Max. On Revit, it's completely different, so that would have to be a whole nother kind of lesson. But if you're using Rhino, which I know most of you guys are, we're going to kind of go through this whole setup here. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that your current renderer is set up. Oh, actually, first thing you need to do is open the damn file. So let me do that now. So I'm going to pull up my third year Hajar model. I know some of you guys have seen this. So this is this the model that I have in here is a really highly detailed model that has a lot of different moving parts and was really great to use for V-Ray and some of the kind of showcase some of the different tactics and lighting skills that you can have when you're playing with depth perception and when you're actually modeling a lot of different components. You guys probably won't have as many components in this model, but doing a lot of things like glass, brick, concrete block, roofing material, some wood if there's any sort of fixtures in there, this is going to be really helpful for that. So yeah, so the first thing you want to do is set the current renderer. So that should be set at V-Ray for Rhino. All 4 of these should load when you open up the actual Rhino window and when you actually open up your file. So just make sure you're selecting the V-Ray for Rhino. The next thing you're going to do, and I think Andrew's actually going to walk through this part, is go through the kind of the asset editor, and then we're going to go through some of the different settings and how to apply some different tactics here. So Andrew, you want to take over?
Yeah. So essentially what you're going to want to do is open up what Peter just opened is the asset editor under the V-Ray tab at the top. So there's 2 panels that Peter just opened, the left side being a lot of the V-Ray materials that are already in V-Ray itself, and then the right side being the different settings, which we're going to be going through. So if you want to click on the
setting tab
page.
Sure.
So just to start it out, Under the first tab, the renderer, you're going to want to make sure that the engine is set to CPU, and you're always going to want to make sure that you have progressive turned on. For the quality, custom is obviously you changing the different categories that you want yourself. The other ones, low, medium, and high, very high, are all set themselves for different V-Ray standards. So we're going to go through a custom setup here.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first one under camera, looking at exposure, we typically set it at 12.5 is a good place to start. Essentially, the higher value that you have for the exposure value, it's going to be brighter. The lower value, it's going to make your model darker. Depending on how your model works, you might have to make it brighter or darker. That's just something you're going to have to play with. So move on to render output. So under render output, we're just going to go through a test first. So for a test render, you're going to want to set the dimensions to about 800. Once you set the dimensions for the first one, it's automatically going to change the dimensions for the second one due to the aspect ratio. Save image. Under environment, if you click that box that Peter's going to click on here, and then you click where it says sky, when you first open it, it will more than likely probably be set under bitmap. You're going to want to change it to sky that he has selected there. And then under sun, you're going to want to set it to Rhino document sun. Rhino sun just ultimately works a lot better than V-Ray sun. It's a bit easier to use. So if you click that, then just click back. So if we continue onto these settings, if you go over to then the right side, ray trace, you typically don't need to mess with too much. Under global illumination, you're going to want to make sure that primary rays is set to a radiance map and secondary rays is set to light cache. Those typically work the best and you're not really going to want to mess with those. Under a radiance map, for a test render, this will typically tell you how long the render is going to take. So for a test, it's good to set it at -1 for minimum, and for max rate, set it to 1. Some subdivs, we're going to set to 50. And then the interpolation, 30 is typically a good one to set it at. Under light cache, typically leave those to what they are. And then ambient occlusion, that will probably be turned off. You're going to want to make sure you turn it on. That's going to make sure, it's going to give your model ultimately better lighting and a better final product for the render.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
material.
Yeah. So if you want to do a material, so if you just kind of like hide the asset editor, just move it off to the side. So if we want to add a material, the process that you're going to want to go through is you can either select a singular object itself, or if you plan ahead and you make all objects of the same material on one layer, you can select essentially that entire layer and then change all those objects on the layer to the same material. So Peter's going to select here the wall here. So if you go back to that asset editor, so you're going to want to go to the materials section and basically pick whatever material you want to use for this object or layer. Peter's going to choose school bricks. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to right click. If you're doing one object, you just do apply to selection. If you're doing an entire layer, you would obviously do apply to layer and then choose whichever layer you're trying to apply it to. So if you click apply to selection, so you're not going to see it now because it's in a shaded view, but if you go to render, you should be able to see that that material is now on that wall of the building. So if you want to go into rendered view.
Might be a little slow, but yeah, you can see the kind of the copper popping up. some of the different things that are going on there. So it's showing up white is because it was mapped as a kind of unique material there. So that's probably why that's happening. It was a kind of a custom imported one that I had. So we'll go through how to do that in a little bit. But in order to kind of test it out, Andrew, do you want to walk through how to actually go through like a rendering itself?
Yeah, so the teapots, you have all these little tools up at the top here. If you click the drop down on the teapot, the main ones you're going to want to use are the teapot and the teapot with the finger. So I think we just want to use the regular teapot render with V-Ray. So if you click that, so this is essentially going to be our test render here right now.
Oop, I have a clipping plane on.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to turn that.
Let me turn that clipping plane off. So there's going to be some objects that you guys can have in here. So any objects that you add that are V-Ray objects. So I can show you guys how to add some of these, and we'll go through them a little bit. But this clipping plane here, in order to turn it off, just turn off the V-Ray clipper at the top, and it should go away for us. So then it should render out the actual thing there.
So it's going to render here.
Yeah, I think the tool brick one actually might be a broken material.
You want to add another one?
Yeah, I'll just do a different one that I know works.
Just a quick side note. So in Peter's model, he has a ground plane actually modeled because we had a lot of landscape to design in this charrette. If your model would be floating in space for some reason, if you like don't have it sitting in the actual site, Rhino site model, if you type in infinite plane, a plane will basically show up under your model that will allow for shadows to basically register on the ground for your building.
Mm-hmm. So, and you'll actually be able to see that in that asset editor in the infinite plane. So what you can do if you want to turn that off, you just basically just delete the plane itself. That's also really good for kind of setting the like getting, as Andrew said, kind of getting your horizon line in if you have like no background to your building. For you guys doing exterior renderings for the NCMA, it's probably a city block, so you might not be needing it, but for this one, it's good to know.
And then just quickly, the boxes that you see on Peter's screen, you see a yellow one, a blue one, and then it's hard to see it, but there's like an exterior yellow box as well on the edge of the Rhino screen. Those are essentially your, so it's like a safe box. So this will basically tell you what's going to be rendered when you go to do your rendering. So it's called safe frame. The yellow, the interior one is a definite, whatever's in that box is going to be rendered. Between the yellow and the blue will most definitely get rendered. Between the blue and the yellow, probably get rendered. There's a chance that it might not. Anything outside of that yellow box, the gray area that you see, is not going to get rendered. So just plan that accordingly when you're choosing your renderings.
Sorry, hate those things. Okay, so we can kind of go through a typical rendering here. So it usually will show up as its own window. So yeah, now you can see it's a little bit bright of a model right now. But if you, we're gonna make this guy a little bit bigger. Sorry. So you can kind of see what's going on here. So it's rendering out that as a brick facade there. And you can kind of get a sense of like how big in scale those kind of areas are. The one thing that I did do there is I changed the this little window thing. So what that'll do is it will just only render what's actually inside the actual rendered this little red box here versus anything, the entire thing. So if you're just testing one material, it'd be nice to just kind of go through, render whatever is in the box and not the entire image. So you'll see that it'll just update this little portion here. Kind of nice for testing those materials out.
So if this, I guess, finishes rendering, should we talk about the stuff on the side there?
Yeah, so the way that I pulled up this window here is there's a bunch of these little correction control panel things down here. So the one on the far left will open up the panel. And this will basically do, Andrew, if you want to walk through what they are.
Yeah, so these are typically good to use. Obviously, more than likely, you're going to be post-processing this image in Photoshop or something. It's good to just get the rendered image as best as you can get it with exposure and lighting from V-Ray, and not try and deal with like curves and all that stuff in Photoshop. So there's just some correction controls that you can do after the render if there's just some minor inconsistencies throughout the model. So obviously the first one that Peter did was exposure. It's pretty basic. Up the exposure for more light, drop it for less. White balance is pretty good. So this deals with temperature. So if he pulls it to the right, the temperature is going to get a bit cooler, more blues.
Actually, I think it's inverted right now because this is getting warmer. This is getting darker. So.
Oh, true.
Kind of weird, but.
So technically, if you mess with it, you can make your model more warm, give it a more warmer temperature feel, or give more blues to the model. Hue and saturation, obviously you can mess with the hues, change some of the colors. Saturation, make some of the colors pop or decrease that. Lightness, obviously basic. You got a color balance. So I wouldn't really mess with these too much. Those are dealing with like specific colors. Levels, so obviously this is in Photoshop, similar to curves. You can mess with levels, and then curves is actually right below it. So again, like I said, these are things that you can do before you get into Photoshop to really make this image the best that it can be before you start post-processing.
One other thing is the background image. So I usually leave this clear. The reason being is it'll export your file then as a PNG, which is far more easy to work with whenever you're trying to actually put a Photoshop background in. So it'll just have basically a blank canvas in the back that can kind of, then you can add like either different skies or whatnot or other textures. So you don't actually have to go through and like magic wand or like polylasso the whole sky background. It'll just plop an image behind the file. So
especially if there's like sky behind glass.
Exactly. Yeah. That still make it it'll show the sky behind the glass, which is actually really nice. So yeah, so that goes through basically a lot of the different rendering techniques there. One thing that you guys will notice, especially when you're doing your CMU block or some brick, is kind of texture mapping this material here. So when you're trying to add and trying to scale those materials, sometimes they'll show up super huge or super small and you can't actually see what's going on. So in order to change that, what you need to do is you actually need to go into the model itself. You want to select the actual, the wall that you're working with. And then go to the go to the object itself in the properties, and you're going to go to texture mapping. So it's going to be this one right here. So when you select texture mapping, when it loads, oh,
It freeze.
Yeah, it froze me. I just want to set it back to shaded. Okay. So if you guys select texture mapping, what you want to do is, in order to set different brick and whatnot, some of the materials are a little bit different, like grass, but for brick specifically or concrete block, you're going to click apply a box mapping. So you're basically going to draw a box and it's going to scale the brick based on that box size, depending on how big the image itself was. So what I do is I just click a point. I typically start out with, you type 2, like the number 2. You hit enter, 2, enter for the width, and then the height also 2. So I just make a cube. It's going to ask if you want it to be capped or not. I just hit enter for yes. And then it'll map the texture on that kind of scale. So the actual sizing, you'll be able to see in this XYZ, which then you can change on your own. If you need to rotate the image for some reason, say that it kind of rotated them vertically, you go through the XYZ rotation and kind of rotate them there. So yeah, and then if I set this one right, so basically you're just going to go through kind of testing them out. So then I would go into the rendering engine. I would see how it looks. So now it'll scale it to be a different size. So this one looks like it got a little bit smaller, which is fine. And then if say that I find the sizing of it that I like, what you can do in order to kind of make it the same material all around the building, or if you have different objects that you want to match, you would select the file itself, and then you hit match mapping, and then you pick the object that you want to match the mapping to, and it'll automatically scale it in that same dimension. So now this one has the same properties. So that kind of goes through the material adding. That's really kind of it. I mean, the main materials you guys are going to want to be using are brick, concrete, some wood maybe, and then glass. So kind of trying to keep your material palette pretty simple for some of these renderings. It will make the V-Ray rendering go quicker, and it'll also make your probably project maybe not stand out as much, but it'll make it much more easy to work with and able to Photoshop out anything else that you really want to be doing. So the last thing I'll show you guys is how to add some materials themselves. So if you find a material online, and we're going to give you guys a couple of references. So V-Ray doesn't have inherently in the model a lot of materials just kind of locally. It does have some that are really great to work with, like glass and some different bricks and stuff like that. But there's some images like brushed steel or like some reflective flooring that maybe you want to add from an outside source. So in order to do that, you would click import a VR matte file is basically what it comes out as. So you click that. I have a couple of them already preloaded. So I have an architectural glass from a website I'll show you guys in a little bit. You'd hit open, and then it'll open up that file itself, and you can go through and edit all the different properties of it. So if you wanted to have a little bit more refraction or a little more reflection, you're able to do that in here. If you want it to be a little bit more opaque, or you can kind of play around with all these different settings and kind of do the same typical things it would do in like a Rhino file, but it'll do them on a much more advanced scale and a much more accurate rendering engine here. You can even change some of the different coloring of the glass and things like that. So adding in some of your own materials are some of the ways to make your projects actually really stand out. So if you start adding in like steel coloring, or start modeling in some light fixtures and changing the materials on the light fixture, that's a way to really make your rendering stand out from other people's that you might be competing against for this competition. So the last thing, or I guess there's really one or two more things I can show you guys in V-Ray before we go through some final rendering stuff and how to get production worthy ones. So the first one is going to be some lights. So if you have any lights in your actual interior spaces, they're great to model themselves. And the way that you can edit them is kind of done also in V-Ray too. So, but you're going to want to do is go to like an interior view where you're going to be doing those different lighting techniques. So this is the inside of my little school building, my little kind of farmhouse. I actually modeled a couple of different lights. So what I did was I had a spotlight, so a V-Ray spotlight and a V-Ray point light. And I kind of combined the two. So the point light is all the way at the top here, and the spotlight is what comes out and kind of fans directionally. So I can model another one for you guys. So if you type point light, you can then just pick the point light locations. So say that I just put it on this corner. When you select the point light itself, you click the point light. You can edit it in the asset editor here, or you can do it up in here. So it'll open up the light itself right here. So you can start changing around the intensity of it here. This is going to take a lot of play depending on how big your model is or how like kind of scaled the actual file is. So you can kind of edit the intensity and then also the color of the model. So I usually like to have my lights a little bit more yellowish. I think it gives it a little bit more of a warm color inside, and it gives it a little bit more of a realistic look versus just a really bright white light that would be like a really bright white LED. You can even do colored lights if you want to do, like if you want to make a neon green light, you could. I don't recommend it, but you could do it. And that's how kind of you would change around with those different lights. So and here I have a bunch of lights that I've modeled. So I have spotlights that you can then change the dimensions on. And then you're just basically going to do the same thing you would do for a material. So you're going to go back and forth between the rendering a test little region and then also like kind of seeing what the light will look like in the model space itself. The one other thing that you're going to want to know about the options is when you're doing something like a sphere light, which is what all these little points are up here. Some of the things that you're going to want to edit are whether or not you want to make it invisible. So you'll be able to see the point if you don't do that. So I always turn on invisible, and then you can turn on and off whether you want it to cast shadows or not. I always keep them on because that's the realistic look for it. But you can turn them off if you'd like to, if you want to get more of a kind of a clay rendering feel on the inside that's not like a very, maybe not like a realistic, but it just brightens up a space. You could do it that way too. Okay, and then the last thing I'll show you guys is a clipping plane. So I already have one modeled in here. But what a clipping plane will essentially do is it'll allow you to cut sections through your model. So whenever you want to like do a section perspective, that's how you would set them up. So in here, I already have a clipping plane, so I can type another one. I don't know if I have to type V-Ray. Yeah, so you can do visible clipping plane here. Basically, you'll just draw a normal clipping plane like you normally would. Set it up. Wherever the point is the direction it's going to be going. And then you kind of work around it from there. And then the way you can turn them on and off, as I showed you guys a little bit earlier, but it kind of got cut off on what I was doing. So in the objects here, you would just turn off the V-Ray clipper on or off if you want to actually showcase them or not. So that'll determine whether or not it's actually being used to cut anything. When you want to cut through sections or you want to do elevations, it's a great way to do that. If you want to cut right at the street, you can kind of set the view. So if I set the view as a front view, I can actually render out an entire elevation doing it this way. Or if I want to render out a section, it's really great to just set the view this way and then turn on all your V-Ray settings and just render them out. Because I think for my NCMA, I wound up punching out all my drawings just going through V-Ray and kind of getting them clean and clipped. So that's one way to kind of go through all that different stuff, doing all the V-Ray kind of clipping planes and settings like that. So really a different way to take your project to another level. So, so Andrew, if you want to walk through some of the final rendering settings that we can go.
Yeah. So earlier we went through some of the settings will stay the same, but most of them were just test render settings that made it go pretty quick. So we're gonna change a few of them to make it final product renderings. So if you go into Asset Editor, so exposure, I mean, that's not going to change for like whether it's going to take longer or not. That's just, you know, if you need to change it because your model is too bright or too dark, you can go ahead and do that. The first big one is going to be the dimensions. So if you go down to Render Output, under dimensions, a good starting point is 2000 for the first one, or Peter 2500, doesn't matter. That's going to automatically then change. The second one, a lot of the times you're going to be having renderings that stretch across the whole board. So this will make the rendering a lot bigger. If you go to irradiance map then, the min rate and max rate, so we put the numbers close together. As I mentioned, the further you put them apart, the longer it's going to take. So if you want to go to like -3, you can do 2 then. You could also do 3 if you wanted it to take a little bit longer. Those are good starting points. Subdivs, we typically change to 100 for the final. Interpolation, I think we typically keep it 30.
Yeah.
Again, keep light caches all the same, and then ambient occlusion, keep that turned on.
Yeah.
That'll help a lot with the lighting.
Yeah, so those will punch out renderings that are really high quality. They'll be a lot bigger and a lot kind of easier to work with. So there's some other stuff in here that I wanted to mention as well for you guys. So some material overrides. So you can select the different materials you want it to override. So say that you want to do like, you don't want to show like a brick or something like that. You just want to show it as gray. You can do that, and then you can just set the override color right here and kind of go through the different stuff. And then you can also change the intensity of it there as well. That's kind of a quick way to just not show a material versus having to go back and change them all out to like a generic thing that you want to go through with. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much it as far as the V-Ray stuff goes. That'll get you guys to a pretty good starting point. I know that we went through a lot of information, so I know that you guys are going to probably have to slow this down a little bit in order to kind of get all the different information you guys really need to be punching out kind of final quality renderings that you guys are want to showcase. So there's definitely some other stuff in here that we didn't talk about. There's actually a lot, but I think we've really just brushed the surface on what you can actually do with this and how to produce some really, really high quality stuff. So I really encourage you guys to play around. There's a ton of different websites I'd also like to mention. So one of the main ones that I like to get a lot of materials from, and I can show you guys that here. Let me just move some of this stuff around that I can see. So some of the different websites that I like to use. So Flying Architecture is one. Actually right now, all the material libraries, or at least most of them, and even some of the models and tutorials are all free, just because of the kind of quarantine that we're all currently having to deal with. So if you go to materials, it has a ton of different materials and finishes that you can use. And it'll download them all as Vismat files, and you can download them locally. Most of them are free. Some of them you have to pay for, so you can get a lot of different concrete, things like that. Some other ones, if you just search V-Ray material, you can find some of the different places that you can go. So Vismats is a great one for just, if you're trying to find any really material, all of them here are free. So you can kind of go through like different miscellaneous, so like water or roofing or stone or some different brick veneers or some concrete block. You can kind of create them all that way. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all of the information that Andrew and I had for you. If you guys have any other questions or you guys want any other help, we're always free by email or by just kind of logging into the Beehive website. I'm actually going to give you guys my phone number in a minute. That way, if you guys have any questions, you can even text me and I can kind of get back to you as quick as you need. Again, the sheet that that we're sharing with you guys has all this information there. So it has it all written down for you guys. Kind of even has some more tutorial stuff on clipping planes and fur and stuff like that you can do some grass stuff if you ever need to do that. And then, yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. One other thing that I wanted to mention is we're going to be doing another tutorial. It'll actually be me and Austin. We're going to be going through some no rendering engine rendering techniques and how to get quick perspectives out, kind of really seamlessly and easy. And you actually don't need a really high processing power in your computer to do it. So you won't actually have to remote desktop it. So that'll be kind of an easy way for you guys to go through some of that stuff. It's going to come in really handy in Rome when you guys don't have really high-end computing power there. And some of the stuff that we actually had to do when we were over there, and kind of tools and tricks that we used when we were there. So other than that, if you guys want to take my phone number down, it's 845-325-0887. So if you guys ever need to kind of reach out or you want some quick help on anything like that, feel free. And then we're also going to be doing, I'll mention it again in the next tutorial, but we're also going to be doing, we can do any sort of board review. We usually do it for the entire class. We usually have like a whole pinup session that you guys do beforehand, but we're always free. If you guys want to send you guys boards over to us and you kind of want to email them as kind of PDFs, we can mark them up and then kind of you send them back and so you guys can see what kind of comments that we had on either drawings or layout or different things like that. We're not really allowed to talk about design anymore, but we can go through some of the different kind of presentation quality stuff that can kind of help sell your guys' projects. So I think that's all I had. Andrew, do you have anything else?
No, that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks, guys. I'll have Felicia upload this, and then, yeah, we'll be back. I think me and Austin are going to be doing another one on Friday, so it should be posted either this weekend or by Monday at the latest. So, all right, yeah. Thanks, guys. I guess we can, we'll talk to you guys a little bit later. Thanks.
See ya.